I'm Cheryl Oldham, Vice President of the Institute for a Competitive Workforce, the 501c3 sort of education arm of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And we are pleased to be a sponsor of this event, and thank you all for allowing us to be a part of it. We think it's obviously very important, the work that NCTQ is doing here and has done for many, many years. One housekeeping note, I think maybe because hard to read people's handwriting, we'll go ahead and let folks just stand up at the end when we go to questions, to stand up and ask your question directly to the panelists that you want to direct the question to. And as far as Twitter, folks will hand me Twitter questions, so we'll sprinkle those throughout as well. I'm going to just do really brief introductions of the panelists so that we can get right to the discussion. On my far right is Dr. Susan McLean-Benner, currently serves as the Director of the Graduate School of Education and the College of Education, Health and Human Sciences at the University of Tennessee, where she is also the Associate Dean of Professional Licensure. She also serves as currently the President of the Tennessee Association of Colleges of Teacher Education. To her left is Brian Kelly, the editor of U.S. News Media Group. He is responsible for all the company's content, which includes the website usnews.com, the digital magazine U.S. News and World Report Weekly, and a series of print publications, including education and healthcare guides. To Brian's left is Mark Lascelles-Peterson, and Mark currently serves as the president of the Teacher Education Accreditation Council, a national agency with 127 accredited programs at 100 institutions in 25 states. Prior to his service as president, he was 2 years as the vice president, and prior to that served in faculty and administrative posts in public and private higher education. And then we have Dr. Eric Smith, most recently Florida's Commissioner of Education. Before holding that office, Dr. Smith was with the College Board, where he served as Senior Vice President for College Readiness. And prior to that, has spent many years in administrative positions in a number of states, Florida, Virginia, North Carolina, Maryland. And to Dr. Smith's left is Kate Walsh, who you all know, but I will say is the president of the National Council on Teacher Quality since 2002. Before coming to NCTQ, she worked for the Able Foundation in Baltimore, the Baltimore City Public Schools, and the Core Knowledge Foundation. I'm going to start this out by throwing it to Dr. Benner, and maybe the most vocal critic on the panel of the review that NCTQ is undertaking in partnership with U.S. News, and I want to give her the opportunity to kind of start us out and give us her thoughts.
Thank you very much. Yes, and I'm the author of one of those letters that Art referenced. Not the sole author, but several people in the state of Tennessee helped to craft one of those letters that you'll find if you click on that transparency map that's on their website. Thank you very much for having me here. I appreciate the time and the opportunity to engage in this conversation. I would also like to stipulate that I do believe NCTQ is well-intentioned, and that I would not have accepted the invitation if I thought otherwise, that we must come together and have a dialogue, because there is need for educational reform and improved academic outcomes for children in the public schools in our country. So with that, they have set a lofty goal here. They have identified 6 different rationales and intended outcomes for this project. They have indicated that they want to improve the academic outcomes of children in our country. Excellent, great outcome. They have indicated that they want to help students find a school to go to. Sounds like a reasonable thing. I go back to the days where we had booklets this thick, Peterson's guides, and you looked them up and you got the ratings, and buddy, you're there. U.S. News and World Report, everybody's doing that. Where do you want to send your best buys in America, you know? So you pick your regional things. Yeah, so that's a reasonable thing to want to provide to the world. Employers need to know where's the best supply of the best qualified. It's a great goal. Yeah, sure. Although I think that local reputation probably precedes any national ranking, but nevertheless, you might have somebody coming from out of state that you want to use that ranking to use to make a decision, and that they want policymakers to have the capacity to sanction poorly performing schools. So that's a pretty negative twist to it, but an appropriate thing to have on the list. It needs to be done because it hasn't been done before, and in fact they indicate that there's a dearth of information about the quality of teacher preparation programs. I would question whether there's a dearth of information. After all, when invited to serve on this panel, needless to say, I started pulling books off my shelf and documents off the internet and could not begin to even glance at the many, many resources that I had available to draw from to prepare for this. Nevertheless, I concur with them that a national study of the quality of teacher education needs to be done, and it needs to be done well and right. If it's going to be done, it should cause no harm, and it should not cause misinformation. So, where do we go from here? One more goal they have in mind is that they want to transform teacher preparation through incentives to get a better grade in the U.S. News and World Report, I assume. They have articulated that they want to improve the pipeline, and they want to transform teacher education by conducting this report annually. And so I suppose I will step up to the plate and say, I will look at their standards and see how well I can do on them so that I can improve my score, and employers will like me and students will want to come to me, etc. I will argue that no single tool or process evaluation system, no matter how worthy it is, can achieve all of those lofty goals. We need something that is not focused on efficient, but really doesn't do any of those things well. Let's identify what the intention here is and focus on something that will achieve that intended outcome. Let's not try to solve every single problem in the world with one instrument. That, in fact, will only lead to a single letter grade being published about these institutions, even given the stipulation that they have identified the intention that they will write further analytical information about individual institutions on their website. But the big product from this work is a single letter grade. All right, my next point has already been addressed by the first panel, but I'd like to reiterate a couple of things. The standards debate is what I'm going to call it. My standards are better than your standards. My standards are more transparent than your standards. My standards are more measurable than your standards, etc. Do we want to use NCATE, NTASC, ATE, or NCTQ has now thrown their hat in the ring with a new set of standards? And you're looking at the student teaching standards today. There's a whole other set of standards and indicators for this study, this review that is underway. So let me since you all have the report for the student teaching, let me direct your attention to page 13. And if you'll look at the third item down, qualifications for cooperating teacher, and in particular what is written under NCATE's column. And then if you'll look over to page 16, the first sentence on page 16 reads, most notably, NCATE does not indicate any qualifications that the cooperating teacher should possess. Now let's flip back to page 13 and look at that spot I just directed you to. Clinical faculty, higher education, and school faculty are licensed in the fields that they teach in or supervise, are master teachers or well recognized for their competence in the field. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there. So let's get the misinformation out about this standards debate. And I think that Nancy made a good point in the first panel that the standards that they've given, you know, There's actually one that I want to debate with, but they've kind of clarified it, so I will just go on to say that we can argue about the quality of the wording of my standard or your standard. Well, if you look at Standard 2 from the student teaching report, that standard as it reads does not allow for collaboration in the placement of cooperating teachers. It specifies that universities make the placement. All right, now they've sort of backtracked and said, well, no, that's not what we really meant. Of course we meant that it would be a partnership. Well, then you better rewrite the standard. And if you rewrite the standard, let's look at the NCTQ and ATE standards that you critiqued in that report as inadequate, which clearly stipulate that it should be a collaborative joint project in the selection of cooperating teachers. So the standards debate has gotten ugly and inaccurate with some misinformation in it. So I'll just leave that there. Data sources. The inputs, outputs has already been touched upon here. Gathering documents. I don't care if you gather every single thing you possibly can about me. All you've done is gather documents. And the value of a teacher preparation program is in its graduates and the people that go forth and teach as a result of it. That is where we need to work together to develop new data systems and new performance measures and join hands in the development of worthy models of assessment of the outcomes of our graduates. Not say, well, gee, we don't have any outputs really reliable and available right now, so we'll just go back and use inputs. No, if it's something's worth doing, it's worth doing right. And measuring our documents, what textbook we use, doesn't really matter if our teachers don't go out and teach reading well. I'm going to mention one more thing, and you're going to have to tell me when, you know,
How about after this one thing?
all right.
And then we'll.
All right. Yes, okay. Because I do have some other things to say, but I will yield the floor. Narrowing the curriculum. The narrowing of the curriculum in Title I schools, I shouldn't just say Title I schools, but economically struggling community schools. The narrowing of the curriculum, particularly in the elementary grades, as a result of what gets tested, means that many, many children in this country do not get exposed to science or social sciences until they are in the upper elementary grades. You wonder why we have a STEM crisis. Well, we're driving it by scheduling the day for children throughout this country with math and reading exclusively, because there's so much pressure for teachers to let that be the curriculum in those classes. And why do I know this? I know this because I have teacher interns placed in schools. And I know what they have the opportunity to teach. And I know what the days look like for children. Now, this planned review models that same focus on math and literacy and reading. Do we really want to transform teacher preparation programs in response to these standards and follow that same narrowing of the curriculum? I certainly do not want that to happen at the University of Tennessee. I would say that I would like to see NCTQ bring its passion and commitment into a collaborative process where we can gather data together on the quality of our graduates and the impact they have on our schools, rather than an inadequate attempt to look at our documents.
Thank you, Susan. And I think NCTQ felt it very important that Dr. Benner come here and be heard, and so we wanted to give her that opportunity. At least, I think we'll get in the rest, probably the rest of your points too throughout the panel. And I guess I'll just maybe turn it to Kate to let her, respond a little bit to some of the comments that Dr. Benner made.
Just several things, and thank you, Susan. I really appreciate you coming and offering us your very frank opinions about the study. just a few things. On the issue of standards, we stand by our statements on the standards that a master teacher is not defined in terms of a cooperating teacher. The qualities of a cooperating teacher, a master teacher may be someone who the school thinks is great, but is not necessarily contributing to student performance. So again, there was too much ambiguity in that standard. We stand by our standards that the institution must be the final decision maker about who the cooperating teacher is. That does not negate the process of being collaborative. Of course it's got to be collaborative. It involves another entity. And I believe institutions will see that in their ratings. Institutions that engaged in a collaborative process and then made the final choice were given a high rating. Institutions that deferred the choice to the school district did not receive a high rating. So I think that that is clear in how we applied the standard more than in any other way. There's a certain rhetorical elegance to the notion that that we shouldn't be judged by what we're doing in our program. We should be judged by our outcomes. And the fact that the outcomes aren't ready yet, that's just excuse making. But the sad fact is that we think we've made a very strong case for what is essentially a chaotic field. The field has yet to define basic standards of performance in almost any area. So the notion that we should, the statement that we should not care what a textbook is, I will tell you, after reviewing the some 650 textbooks that we looked at for reading, everyone in this room should care about what textbook teachers are exposed to. They are consistently exposed to false information about reading. And I have a problem, a very deep problem, when teachers are given wrong and scientifically invalid information for how to teach reading, when we have a science that is concrete and actionable. So there's no excuse for anyone in this country to be putting a textbook in a classroom that delivers false information. And that's what we're trying to expose, because most of the textbooks used in the reading programs in the United States today are conveying false information about how to teach reading. And then I found the last statement particularly puzzling, that we are narrowing the curriculum. Yes, we absolutely want elementary teachers to know mathematics, and we're very clear about that. And yes, we want elementary teachers to know how to teach reading. We're very clear about that. But I will tell you that we get consistently back from ed schools that our curriculum standards for elementary teacher are way overly ambitious. We require 3 sciences, 4 history, English literature, art, music. We are the, and then we hear back from institutions that our standards are too broad, they can't possibly offer all those courses. So I'm not sure where the narrowing of the curriculum comes from, because we have the widest ranging coursework meant to prepare teachers for teaching the Common Core of any organization that has put forward any recommendations for how to prepare elementary teachers. So perhaps, Susan, you might clarify why you think that that constitutes a narrowing of the curriculum, but I want to give a chance for these other gentlemen to join in.
Great, thanks. I'm going to ask Mark a quick question. As president of the Teacher Education Accreditation Council, maybe you can tell us briefly about how your organization accredits teacher preparation programs, and maybe how sort of your perspective on NCTQ's
well, to answer
standard.
that question fully, I usually use about an hour-and-a-half PowerPoint presentation.
No PowerPoints.
And I can't do that here, although I have it on my computer if anybody's interested. I'd be happy to do it. I think there are some things that accreditation shares with the study that's anticipated, the rating study that's anticipated here, and one is operating in a public space, which leaves us open to spirited public comment, of course, which we're clearly sharing here, and a commitment to doing it on an empirical basis. So let me see if I can get to your question. TIAC's approach to accreditation is an empirical approach. We are almost agnostic historically about standards. There are a number of standards. We had this conversation, Kate, at an earlier meeting, that really the standards that are put forward here are ones that a TIAC institution could very well adopt and say, we're going to use these standards. But the accreditation process and the kind of evidence that we look for do differ in this sense, but it goes in the direction that I heard Julie moving with saying, well, the standards maybe aren't enough on the previous panel. TIAC's accreditation process says whatever standards are that you've set out, and they should be based in research, they should be conformed to the local policy where you are. There are a number of different pressures coming to make these things come together. Whatever those standards are, you have to have some evidence that you're actually achieving them. And in terms of the conversation as it was going before, are you judged on the basis of documents, judged on the basis of outputs? I think in the accreditation framework we talk about, you're judged on the basis of whether you have any evidence to support what you're doing in your program. So what you're doing in the program does matter, and outcome evidence that supports that matters as well. So there's some similarities between an accreditation process and other kinds of studies, but there are also some distinctives. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, maybe you could tell a little bit. I mean, what are some of the evidence, what evidence do you look at if you don't look at, if you're not saying you need to meet these certain standards, what sort of evidence of quality are you looking?
Right. TIAC starts with the premise that there are only so many kinds of evidence that are out there. And no piece of evidence is really perfect. We're not looking for any one individual measure. And so, like in a lot of similar types of research studies, you'd say, well, if you can't rely on any one particular piece of evidence, I'll go with the example where there's a similarity between the quality principles that TIAC puts forward and the standards that are here on the table. And one is the concern for subject matter knowledge. TIAC's framework says there are a few things that you have to be sure of if you're going to say that someone should be a teacher, and one is that they have to know the content. Now, what kind of evidence is there of content? Well, there's actually a number of different types of evidence, for example, someone who's going to be a secondary teacher in TIAC's framework, you have to have a major in the content area you're going to teach. Okay, we've got a real similarity there, an overlap. But what's the evidence that that's sufficient? That might be what the program requires. What's the evidence that it's sufficient? Well, what evidence can a program bring forward? Typically, they bring forward grades in the major, right? That's fairly reasonable. If you did a math major at Princeton and you passed the math courses at Princeton, you probably know some math, right? Fair enough, type of a thing. Interesting thing we found, by the way, is that in TIAC's accredited institutions over and over again, what you find when you compare the grades in the content courses for those secondary folks to the grades earned by the other people who are majoring in the same thing, so the math majors who are going to be teachers versus the math majors who are going to go on into engineering, the math majors for the folks who are going to be teachers are equal to or higher than anybody else in their major, okay? So do you accept that as evidence? Sure, as one point of evidence, but we always say you got to have at least two, so you can look at the GPA in the content area, but also perhaps look at the test scores on a licensing exam. That might be something you want to do. You might look at other kinds of ratings as well. So TIAC's approach is to say, be clear about what your standards are, make sure that they fit within our quality principle framework, which you can look at on our website, www.tiac.org. But you have to have multiple pieces of evidence that meet a research standard. So where we start focusing on standards is what's the standard of evidence? How confident are you that this evidence is solid?
I'd like to move on to Dr. Smith and just ask, obviously you recently stepped down as Florida's Education Commissioner, but before you did so, you joined 7 other chiefs in endorsing NCTQ's review of teacher preparation. I just wanted to get your perspective. Why did you all do that and your perspective on the review?
Well, I'd like to just respond a little bit to the study being released today. I think it's very exciting, speaking as a recently departed Commissioner of Education in Florida, that I think this report, hopefully it raises just an incredible amount of debate and discussion within states. I think that is its probably greatest value, is that people could argue about it, but then have the courage to do something about the argument. The fact of the matter is that our student performance, student achievement in most states and across the country is not what we would like it to be in terms of academic preparation, in terms of college readiness and competitiveness on an international basis. And The single factor that's going to lead to a significant improvement in that student achievement is going to be the quality of instruction delivered in our classrooms. And many states have been struggling with issues of how to evaluate and deal with the existing workforce. I think some good progress is being made there. There is still an incredible amount of work to be done around better clarification of what high-quality teacher preparation programs look like, whether they be preparation programs from traditional, quote, traditional university, state college programs, or whether they be from alternative programs. But I think the issues raised in this report will help to focus the conversation and the discussion that goes on within states about what aspects are important, which ones are meaningful, how do we measure up, are they delivering results for us in terms of outcomes and so forth, and can ultimately lead to some significant change in state policy and university, college operations. So I'm very encouraged with this. There are a couple of points that I think that are worth further review at the state level and within institutions. One that I think is very important is further analysis around the pipeline. I think the pipeline analysis of the pipeline can lead to some further refinement in terms of market demand for teachers. How do you gauge that over time as it changes, either increases or decreases? And how do you scale up the admissions process into schools of education and teacher preparation programs? How do you hit that balance so that you can continue to meet the workforce needs of the nation, but you can start to move that standard up within institutions about what's required to get into the program in the first place? I think there are other factors here that I think are very critical, but I think that certainly is one of the most compelling questions that I had after reading the report.
Okay. Brian, I think folks might be curious about your partnership with NCTQ and why you all sort of decided to partner with someone from the outside, and so maybe you can tell us a little bit about that partnership, and then also would love your perspective on sort of the how much opposition there has been to this. And I would assume that at U.S. News you're used to a bit of criticism, but if this is sort of taken it to a new level and sort of what you're thinking about it all.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Cheryl, and thanks for having me here. Having been the recipient of the letter from Susan Brenner and her colleagues and several other colleagues around the nation, several dozen, I think, or I'm not sure what the number is. Some number of these letters, which read remarkably similarly to me, I read them all with great care, and my reaction was, who knew? Who knew that the education system in America was as good as it is, apparently, in the minds of the deans of education schools? We're doing just fine. We do not have a teacher problem. We have a well-regulated system of producing teachers that is, doing a great job and evaluating and has a few glitches here and there that they'd love to fix. Frankly, it was delusional. The disconnect between what was stated and the evidence that's out there, that some of which we've seen in this report today, some of the bits that Arthur put out in terms of the state of teacher education. The ultimate outcome measure to me is the state of education in America. And if anybody thinks we don't need more better teachers, among other things, they're fooling themselves. So I think, I look at teacher education, and I have to say it is a self-regulating, self-satisfied industry that is desperately in need of an independent third party to come in and shine some sunlight on it. I come from a perspective of journalism. I come from a perspective of representing consumers, readers. I go to lots of academic conferences, and I see lots of well-meaning people exchange great ideas and talk about moving the needle an inch here and an inch there. And I can tell you from the public perspective, you know, they don't care. They're tremendously frustrated. The reason they come to people like U.S. News is because they don't want to go to a bookshelf full of massive studies and look at, you know, acronym-laden institutions. They want some clean, clear results. They want progress in the classroom. They don't want to be spending as much money as they're spending. Clearly, we're spending vastly more dollars for less outcome over the last 20-plus years. So to suggest that there's not something significantly wrong, again, is delusional. We came into this because we think that we have rated a variety of schools. We started rated colleges in 1983. Colleges then were quite resistant, you know, major national universities and four-year schools, quite resistant in some cases to providing the data. As time has gone on, we've really institutionalized some national standards for data, again, based on the premise that we think readers are entitled to that information. Now the schools are quite good at cooperating with us. We have ranked education schools on a peer basis, but the methodology that Kate and her group have come up with, we think is very important, very well vetted. We've looked at it with them closely. We think it is, as Susan said, not perfect. Nothing is perfect. The ideal of perfection that the education deans would like us to acquire will give us some pretty sound results by about 2050. But I think in the meantime, we have some pretty good prospects here of getting some very useful information on the table. So that's our intent in being involved in this, and it is going to be a rocky road. We think some people are going to cooperate, and good for them, because I think transparency should be a competitive advantage for people in this marketplace. The folks who don't cooperate, you know, will probably have to go into a category of people who are unranked, unrated, indecipherable. But we'll see how that works out over time.
Thank you. Susan, you mentioned in your earlier remarks that a national study should be done well and right, and that you welcome a study of that sort. Is there something that NCTQ could change in the way it's currently constructed, this review, that would lead you to sort of embrace it or want to be more a part of it?
Certainly. If you want that to be a yes/no question, yes, I'm sure NCTQ could make adjustments to their approach and their strategies, and we could come together to develop a worthwhile evaluation of teacher education. I will tell you my reaction when I heard that U.S. News and World Report was going to start do this. I didn't understand that it was going to be a letter grade per institution, but I thought it was going to be a ranking system similar to the ones they already have in place. And I thought, well, it's about time, because I'm at an institution where College of Business, not only the College of Business is ranked and recognized, but individual programs, engineering, individual programs. And it's like, why do we just have this one big lump rating for colleges of education? I'd really like a chance to contribute to, throw my stuff out there and take the risk and say, let's see where I stack up in my teacher education program, because I do believe that we have a very exciting, effective program at the University of Tennessee. And, you know, have at it. Bring it on. But let's do it right before we put out public ratings, letter grades by institutions. And it's happening in this student teaching report right here, where it's not to denigrate at all the winners out of that report that's just come out. But there are schools and named names with weak and poor by their names, and the damage is done. But the question, I think, is going to already immediately be raised as to why one of the top #1 rated in the college U.S. News and World Report rankings doesn't reflect that way in this most current report. There is a disconnect. There is flaw in what's going on here. And if we're going to do this and do it collaboratively and not create hostility, then we've got to find a way to work together and not against each other. And right now, it is not the weak programs that have organized these letters. You've described the letters not quite the same way I would, and if you can read all of the letters for yourselves to determine what the nature of the content is and the objections, because NCTQ has put them all on their website, and I applaud them for that, because it made my homework for this meeting a whole lot easier to be able to go to that one map and read all the letters and the responses to them. But it's got to be done in a way that it is the Stanfords, the Harvards, the NYUs, it is those deans, university presidents, provosts that have stepped to the plate and said, we object to this approach. It is not the schools that are most vulnerable here. They wouldn't have the capacity to pull us together. It is the AAU institutions, it's the cadre, research-intensive universities that have said, this is not the way we want to do this. We want to do this in a way that will be constructive, that will in fact help us sort out those institutions that should diminish their output or eliminate their output, and strengthen and boost those who have developed worthy models that need to be emulated. I do not believe this mechanism and this hostile environment will produce worthwhile results, other than increasing the division between us. So yes, I think something can be done.
Kate, do you want to respond?
Just to that point about that somehow the objections by the schools of education have more merit because it's the research universities, what we consider the top-tier universities who have come out objecting to this. I personally am gratified by the fact that that we have caused so much discomfort at with the elites. I think that that it's really important that we do not rely on reputation. That too often that some schools of education have ridden on the coattails of the academic prestige of the larger institution in which they reside. I am particularly gratified that when we come out with ratings, I have reporters say, I've never heard of those institutions that you're giving high marks to. I find that that gives me great confidence that we're doing the right thing, because I do believe that there are institutions around the country that are doing a tremendous job preparing teachers, and they get no credit because they're like UT Pan American, University of Texas Pan American, educating first-generation Latino students going to college, which is doing a really phenomenal job preparing that population down in southern Texas. The fact that Stanford or Teachers College or whatever has a problem with what we're doing, I think speaks to a larger mindset among the ed schools that, that they really resent that there is any outside voice on this subject. I think that too often ed schools are not respecting their client, and their client are K-12 educators. And I think if there's no other argument for institutions to cooperate with this study, they ought to be listening to the fact that school chiefs have no problem with this study. They want it done and they want to see the result. We have superintendents lining up, they want to see it done, and they want to see the results. If there is no other evidence that ed schools can no longer decide for themselves what kind of teacher to provide the classroom, it is the support we have gotten from PK to 12 educators. So I think that that needs to be listened to. You're not hearing anyone else come out and saying, not fair, not quite right. This is, and I think that it's important to listen to those voices.
Dr. Smith, do you want to comment on Kate's last remarks?
Yeah, well, I just say, you know, as commissioner, I couldn't find enough information. Now, we several years ago started generating our own information on education preparation programs across the board, looking at the academic impact graduates had by institution, and 2 years ago started publishing that information with the deans, but making it public on our website as well. And it is the Ed Week does the state ranking with a letter grade. I went down to Florida about 4 years ago and was terrified that I wouldn't be able to move the ranking up a little bit, and that was a good terror to have as a commissioner, because it did make me work hard on the narrow measures that Ed Week has, but on the bigger spectrum of what's important. And it wasn't our sole mission of what we did, but we did care about the quality, and it was good for us to know that somebody else was just looking to see whether or not we made any difference or not. And those kind of pressures help all of us get better, help institutions get better, help states get better. The Chiefs for Change is a small, hardly known group of radical state chiefs that really want to drive a difference in student outcome. Very supportive of the work of the National Council of Teacher Quality and trying to uncover and identify ways of improving the quality of our teaching workforce. So this kind of work, making it public, making it something that is not just discussed by academics, but by elected officials, by mom and dad that care, about whether or not the teachers that are populating their community schools are being prepared successfully or not. Is critically important to us. I could go on. We have one of our biggest challenges in Florida was working with our struggling schools, historically low-performing schools. We went through the rule book about having to reconstitute at a certain point, and the question we wrestled with was reconstitute with who? Where are the better teachers, and how do we know? How do we know these are a population, and the new ones that we're recruiting in from the institutions, how do we know that they are coming from a program that in fact drives better results? So all these questions are questions that is not as if the rule book has been written and permanently defined. It's a rule book that begs definition, and I think publishing these standards will help move that discussion and debate. That this is a place to begin, and hopefully these will become more refined as more evidence and data becomes available and states start to look at this more routinely. But I do think this is a great starting point to begin what hopefully is in my experience, change doesn't happen with a nice coming together meeting where we all have nice donuts out in the foyer and a cup of coffee and tea, and talk about what we're going to do to make the world a better place. But it usually comes from some pretty tough analysis and difficult conversations, and the requirement that people or institutions or states do things in a different fashion. And change doesn't come necessarily come easily. And I think the pressure point is one that this report will produce, has the potential of leading to some very, very good outcomes for children.
Great, thank you. And I think I'm sensitive because I understand at noon sharp, music starts playing. Yeah, and so we are definitely going to know when our time is up, and I want to be able to get to questions from the audience. So if you all want to, sir, you want to go first? Sure.
Similar question for the previous panel, and due to the screening, it wasn't good forward. I do want to say, though, that I find myself wanting to respond to so many things that have been said by the panel, and of course there is no time. I do want to say, though, to Kate, very briefly, that the reaction that you're getting to the proposed study has nothing to do with discomfort. I don't pretend to speak for my colleagues at major research universities, but we welcome public scrutiny. In fact, that's sort of what we do. And we enjoy and adhere to critical practice, but we also insist in the highest standards of ethical research. We insist in peer review, in critical open discourse about the validity of the research enterprise and the results, which are then made available for replication and dissemination. But that said, let me read the question, because I was prepared to submit it again and didn't get the chance to do so, so it's already in writing. And this is to all members of the panel or anyone who wants to respond. The NCTQ methodology has been described as, quote, critically flawed by experts, fatally flawed, excuse me, by experts. To my knowledge, NCTQ studies have never been published in credible, peer-reviewed journals. Is there any reason to think the NCTQ U.S. News and World Report study will produce valid results? Why or why not?
Good. Thanks for that question, and I'm going to answer it, if that's okay with the rest of my panelists. First of all, the only, I'm not sure who you're citing, critically flawed. There was a study by EduVentures that the Texas deans hired EduVentures to come out and, no, it was Texas, wasn't it? Illinois, no. The Illinois deans hired the firm EduVentures to come out and say exactly that. So I find it a little problematic when a paid gun is hired to say something and then we're supposed to respect what they have to say. I will also point to the fact that Illinois, for example, we had 2 errors out of thousands of ratings that we did that were brought to our attention. Neither one altered the rating. We get a lot of letters from institutions, and we go through our ratings very carefully. So we have we take great pride in our accuracy. But to that point about the concerns from ed schools about how we will treat them, I guarantee you that there is far more value in cooperating with us and engaging in some relative level of dialogue than forcing us to go to open records. If we're forced to go to open records, we are not going to engage in a dialogue with institutions. So if institutions are interested in the most accurate rating possible, they need to voluntarily turn over their data, not force us to go to open records. That being said, we will absolutely have an independent review panel put together appointed by NCTQ that will review a sampling of our ratings to ensure that we did a fair and valid job and certify the fairness and validity of our work. And then when we publish our ratings, whether or not it was open records or voluntary, we will post every document we receive from an institution on our website so that the public can judge if we were unfair. So I don't know what else this organization can do to provide assurance to the institutions that we are not out to unfairly malign anyone's reputation. But, so, I think that's an adequate answer.
Next question. Sure. Yeah.
Moving away from the rankings debate here, if I may, if the desired outcome is to decrease the total number of teachers, particularly the wishy-washy ones that aren't even sure if they want to stay in the profession, and at the same time increase the number of effective teachers, particularly in specific content areas, math, science, maybe English, then why even have colleges of education be undergrads at all, particularly with middle school and high school teachers? Why not kind of combine Furman's 5th-year program, Cardinal Stritch's program with the small mentoring aspect, and make it maybe a 1.5-year graduate school program where colleges would then choose from highly qualified math majors, science majors, English majors, put them in this program. You have a smaller pool, you have more intensive training, and then they can get a better, a more effective program?
What you're talking about is the California model, which actually doesn't work that well, though it has the same appeal as what you described. But when you really examine what teachers need to be effective, they can't just take any math course in college. They need to take math content coursework that relates to their education, the elementary levels of teaching. So when we go into California, and that's of great concern to Charlie Reed as chancellor there and other folks out there, because they don't control the content that teachers get. They just, for example, a teacher will come in having just majored in whatever, psychology or whatever. There's no assurance that that institution has the mathematics content they need to be an effective elementary teacher. And that's very different from what Furman is doing, because it's an extension of their four-year program, so they can control the content. I personally think the model that Nellie described is very attractive, but I just want you to hear that there's a very different approach, because she's controlling the content that those teachers need and deserve in their undergraduate preparation. There is specific content in subject areas that teachers need to have.
If I could add to that too, I think it's great that you're thinking about some of the solution sides, and I think that's the conversation people have to have around this. That there are when you think about teacher preparation, there's the input into the preparation programs. When's that appropriate? What your question was, should it be done after a four-year degree or somewhere late? And I think Kate's comment about the right kind of coursework being completed before entry into it. A lot of states right now, their control valve on the quality is teacher certification, which generally is an extraordinarily low standard in mathematics. It's extraordinarily low. It's a sieve that lets freight trains run through it. So if you can flip that and start talking about what's required to get into ed programs, you change the conversation a lot about the output side. So I think this conversation around pipeline, how many are needed, how many, what's the supply, what are the control gates to make sure that we have the highest quality, and then how much time is it going to take to get that accomplished, whether that can be done within a four-year period of time or whether there is a fifth or whatever that's required to get the right kind of coursework under their belt in order to be an effective middle school or high school math teacher or science teacher or music teacher for that matter.
Believe it or not, we're almost having to wrap up, so I really wanted to give at least the three at the other table a chance to not necessarily respond to him, but if you have some sort of thoughts you want to share with us as we wrap up, and then I want to turn it back over to Kate to wrap the day. Mark?
I'll just say I think that it's clear that the conversation around the study is still very charged, and I just want to introduce the idea that antagonism of any kind is also a threat to clarity of communication. And so there's a problem to solve on all sides as we figure out where this new effort is going to fit into the national conversation. But just to point that out, the antagonism is a threat to the validity of all of our efforts at communicating from all sides.
I just say to the point of that last question, which I thought opened up an interesting avenue, which is, thinking a little bit out of the box. And one of the reasons we do something like this is to create a big data set that you can then examine and begin to draw some of these conclusions. Gee, we have too many of these kind of teachers, or this program is this program is that. You don't know the answer necessarily, and we've seen this repeatedly. We were very involved in the hospital ranking industry. We're a key component of improving healthcare. Because of the data that we produce. We didn't know that when we started this, but it's apparent when you look at hospitals that some hospitals have a lot of people dying in the surgical suites and others don't. Well, why is that? How do you begin to rectify that? How do you, highlight best practices that other people can take advantage of? So that this is not a hostile act. It is an attempt to come up with that apples to apples comparison that was referenced before, and then let other people make use of it and find creative solutions to what I think we all acknowledge are some problems.
And my parting shots, in the state of Tennessee, we've had a teacher report card for the past 3 years, and it's been improving over the course of those years, but what it has made me painfully aware of is the need for data quality control, because when you have a teacher report card that comes out with a cell showing that, and I'm making hypothetical numbers here, but real examples of that you had 10 graduates in secondary math, and this is how they performed, when you know in fact you had 5 that year. Who are they missing 5? Who knows? Who knows if any of the 5 that actually belong to you were there? So that there is a serious issue of data quality control. And so when we start whipping out these reports and assigning grades and rankings, we need to know that the data are in fact reliable and reflective of the institutions that are getting those grades. And I think that that is a serious concern. I think that data quality control needs to enable us to go across states, because we have institutions that prepare teachers that do not stay in the same state that they were prepared in, and right now that's virtually impossible to do unless an individual institution comes up with it. So that is the sort of initiative I'd love to see a national organization such as NCTQ to help us with data quality control. And I realize there are a lot of efforts already underway in that arena. And the second thing is that I would also like to reference Deborah Ball and her work. I heard her speak in June at a meeting, and she is aspiring that we would have a universal or a nationwide curriculum for teacher preparation, and that we follow the Common Core that has been modeled for us in math and English and see where we can go, so that we can start setting some agreed upon standards and quit the silly arguments about standards and move past that and say, this is what all institutions of teacher education should be covering, and these are the standards they should be achieving, and this is how they will be measured. Thank you.
Well, the music has started, so maybe you'll join me in thanking this great panel that could go on and on.